Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are excited to get started. My name is Teresa Friesen, and I am here with the honor of being able to chat with David. We will get started with that conversation in a moment. We are here with Scale, as you know, and Scale kind of has this vision, focus on storytelling for startup founders or for people who are interested in the business scene, the local startup scene in the community, thinking about how we can be present in that space, build in this space, and connecting with people who have done it and learning from that experience through stories. I always say that I love to make these conversations things that you can't Google. It's easy for us to look online, for us to read materials, but what we don't often get is the opportunity to really talk with someone and hear the behind-the-scenes stories of what their process really looked like over the years. So we're super excited to have you join us for this. We want to thank our sponsors, Nebraska Startup Academy and Dundee Bank, for making these events possible. We have pizza back here from Dolomiti, which is always wonderful, and cross-strain to get things started. So thank you all for being here. To kick this off, I would love for you to go ahead and do a little introduction of yourself. We're excited to dive into conversation with you.
Sounds great. Can you hear me?
I think it's just a quick button push. Yeah.
Already messed him up. Wow. So I am not known for being succinct, so I'm going to apologize in advance and do my best. But I am David Arnold. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at Buildertrend. I've been there 9 years, which is pretty wild. It's been a fun ride in the sense that it's the same company, but it's been very different. So the first 4 years I was there, it was bootstrapped, still run by the three founders, all Omaha residents, and the last 5 years has been private equity. And so it's been very different lessons, different growth opportunities, but an amazing experience throughout. Originally, I'm from Western Nebraska, so a small town of 1,000 people, a place where no one knows anything about tech. Explain to your grandma how you go from law school to government to tech. Like, you can't do it, so you don't try. But I went to Nebraska Wesleyan, Nebraska College of Law, and then actually came to Omaha to work in the mayor's office. So my career, my original aspirations had absolutely nothing to do with tech. I am one of those weird people that loves policy, still to this day. And the reason I got into tech is one of those wild curveballs like we all have. It's never a linear path. Mine was, in the Omaha mayor's office, we were the first client of a company called MindMixer, which was a SaaS platform for community feedback. So instead of going to the gym on Thursday at 4 to get yelled at, the premise was do it online, do it from your phone, in a various amount of ways. And it was this dream of two former urban planners, two Omaha gentlemen, and we were able to be their first client, and I loved it. And I really had never aspired to be in the tech community. It wasn't on my to-do list, but I loved what Nathan and Nick were doing. And when the job came open, I went from their first client to being their 7th employee. And I was telling a few folks, our first office was right over there in the Mastercraft on the southeast corner. So I looked out that window for 2 years as we went from 7 employees to 50, raised $25 million in venture funding, and it hooked me. There's something about high growth companies where there's always more work than people. Your job description is X, you do Y and beyond. And I've been in SaaS and tech since. So 2 years there, I left to run something called Straight Shot, which was a local accelerator, think InMotion, generator, that sort of model. Ran it for 3 years, invested in 21 companies, and met the Buildertrend founder through that. And so it's been this fun ride since 2012 that I've been in tech. Happy to talk more about each of those experiences, but I think the first point is I had none of this on my radar, and that's taught me some pretty important lessons. I call myself a reform planner, reform perfectionist, and that's the best thing about the startup communities. It gives you things you never would have dreamed of.
That's so true. I think something a lot of us would resonate with, and I think we should dig into that a little bit more. I also wanted to share with you all, David and I were chatting before this, and he disclosed that he really loves question and answer opportunities. So we will definitely make sure to have time for that for everyone here. So any of those questions that are coming to your mind, hang on to those, because we'll definitely be able to chat through those in a few minutes. So I think super interesting to like hear that snapshot story of going from being in a rural community and not, necessarily foreseeing these things, going on to undergrad and law school, and then government and policy, and then into like tech and becoming these early level employee status, and then getting to like a point of raising. Yeah. So one thing I would love to kind of have you elaborate on is what that kind of agility looked like. How did you go from like, these are my skills, to like, these are my interests, and how you tap into those things even when you didn't foresee those next steps happening?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one of the hallmark lessons I learned at Mind Mixer, that first startup, was that masterpieces are made through revisions, not first drafts. I was a person, like I said, a perfectionist. I had this path from Sutherland, Nebraska to law school that I wanted to do. You check the boxes, you get there. And so when you have success being a list maker and someone that just goes linearly, it's hard to adapt. And I don't know that I would have done it. I don't know that I would have gotten to this community if it weren't for a belief in that company and those founders. But on day one, I'm handed like a new client. It's like, just figure it out. Here's the 2 things that you do, and the rest of it, just do it. And you have this like moment of panic, like, oh shit, what did I do? Excuse my language. And then you figure it out. And once you figure it out once, you realize you can figure a lot of things out. And that's the best part about pushing yourself and being at companies that pull you through the corporate life cycle faster, is your growth is also faster. But you have to have the mindset of getting over imposter syndrome, having a bad first draft be where you start, and understand that every revision makes it better. It was a real mindset shift for me. And our COO, Nathan Preheim, at the time was really great at explaining to me like how to do that, how to unlock that. And I haven't turned back since. And that's something I talk to a lot of folks I work with, is just get a bad first draft out there. And then revise. And I think that makes it easier, more approachable to tackle hard things, complex problems. And I think it applies in more than just startups. So for me, that was like the fundamental lesson I learned from the early stage.
When you said that in startups, there's often more work than people, yeah, it probably really does force you to get that bad draft out first, because if you have so much to do, you cannot be perfect at all the things. Can you tell us a little bit more about like what that kind of grind hustle really looked like as you were getting into the startup scene, and what you think is really important for startup founders and early employees to really dig into?
From a business perspective or a community perspective?
Ooh, I would say both, whichever one you want to go with.
I walked right into that, didn't I? I think from a business perspective, the nice thing about the early stage is if you don't do certain things, you don't survive. So prioritization is almost easier in some sense, because if you don't have a product that people actually like, if you don't actually ask for money, you don't get to the next phase. People make up a lot of activities to avoid those things, building good products, asking for feedback, and selling. It's pretty black and white. So both Nick and Nathan were really good about keeping focus on those things, and they were very different and balanced each other well. And so that wasn't hard. It's just you had to get over the fear of asking the question that may give you feedback you don't like, asking for money and someone saying no. It's almost harder at the phase that I'm at now with Buildertrend, where there's a lot of people, a lot of specialization. You have to force yourself to get to the crux of problems. You have to force yourself to use resources really well. So I think there's something that's just inherent about being efficient in the early stage, or you go away. From a community perspective, it's night and day where we were. There was Flywheel, Secret Penguin, Mind Mixer, a few others in the Mastercraft at that time. And there was an energy that we were all trying to prove ourselves, both as companies and as an ecosystem, that was fun. And I think a lot of us had a chip on our shoulder. Now, I think a lot of folks still have that passion, but it's just a different phase, and there's far more things. It doesn't make it easier, but it's pretty cool to come back here and see events like this, companies that have had success.
We all know that startups are inherently risky. And so it's interesting to hear you talk about how in early days, there are these things that you just have to do. And so the fearful part can hold you back. But if you push through it, if you focus on that product, then that is really what can help with your de-risking process. And then you get to a point where, fast forward all those years, you're in this point now, and it's like, man, you really have to be risk averse because you have a lot of people counting on you and a company's success counting on you.
Yeah. The other thing that Mind Mixer taught me was the difference between a careless risk and a calculated risk. Just joining Mind Mixer to a lot of folks, including my grandma in Sutherland, Nebraska, made no sense. But it made sense to me. And it made sense because I could tell you the connection between working in government and then going to a gov tech company. Being a point person for their product within the client, and then also talking to new clients. I could draw those lines, and maybe it's the logical side that overwhelmed the emotional side of me, but it just made sense. And so I took that risk, and I've done it since. And that's other advice that I give a lot is, there are going to be assumptions you're making. There's going to be ways it can go poorly, but as long as it's a calculated risk, not a careless risk, you're going to get something out of it. And so I guess my point is there's nuance to risk, and diving into an early stage venture makes that clearer. You can lose a lot of money. You can, be embarrassed if it doesn't work, but you can do a hell of a lot of work, and all of that is transferable. And so it depends on which factor you're looking at. There's pretty low risk, and from an experiential perspective, if you do things and there's more work than people, you're going to have 10x the experiences you can sell to the next employer. You can use for yourself. If you're thinking just financially, yes. So risk is just nuanced, and that's something that is scary, but you learn by diving in and taking risks. I said risk like 1,200 times there, but hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, it definitely did. Appreciate you sharing that insight. You've kind of hit on, from all your experience, these kind of three snapshots. One being diving really deeply into new products or product that starts working, and then into these other stages of major growth and investment, or accepting a private equity term. Can you talk a little bit about what that progression looks like, both from your perspective, but also recognizing a lot of people here, that's the stuff that they're embedded into and have that kind of future goal in mind?
Yeah, so if I focus on Mind Mixer, Straight Shot, and Buildertrend, the first two are really about finding the first product market fit. What's our reason for existing? What's the offering we want to give to the market? Is that right? And how do we grow it? When I went to Buildertrend, our founder, Dan Houghton, had a very simple, open-ended mandate. I have this idea that we can sell more than software. Go figure that out. And so it was about finding second product market fit, the value add service on top of the core platform, which is the same process in terms of you have an idea, you get feedback, you put it out there, and you see if it's right or not. But the way you make investments is very different. So you have more support when you're part of a big company and you're trying to figure out the next thing, but you also have context switching and the risk of you being a distraction to the core business. And so it's been fun for me to understand the difference. And I think the thing I value most from having experience from startup all the way to private equity backed is that I know the difference between a first product, a second product, 7 employees, 800 employees. And I think that's my biggest encouragement for folks. Like, I'm not a founder, I'm just a person who's made a career working with and for them. And I wish, Charlie and I were talking about this, I wish more people just joined. Like, just join these companies, because the broader your experience from a revenue perspective, from an employee number perspective, the better your insight and the better you'll realize where you're best. And I think that's how communities thrive. That's how employees find their sweet spot. And so that's been the biggest benefit for me in having, the breadth of experiences. I know very clearly what I'm best at, what size of company I enjoy most. And I think the only way I got that was trying things, taking risks, and confusing my grandma in Sutherland.
What would you say or assess would be the barriers to people getting into those and trying it out? Do you find that there's a dissonance there? Is it that there aren't enough opportunities for people in our community, or that people are averse to those opportunities because it's an unknown?
I think it's the latter. I think it's scary. I think it's unknown. Even with entrepreneurship programs, which there are so many more now in college, you still have to join a venture that's going to be risky, flawed. It won't go perfectly. And most rational people say no for one of the 12 reasons before you get to a yes. And that makes sense. But for ecosystems to tip, for companies to tip, people have to get past that. And I think conversations like this, events where you hear stories, humanizes that. But I think it's mostly just fear and not enough modeling. Definitely back when I started, it just wasn't what people did. It wasn't how you built a successful career in Omaha. And I still think we have some of that. We have such a rich traditional business community that supports from afar. And so it still feels risky to go to the tech company as opposed to name your big company. Different paths, both great, but we need more people to try this. And I suspect a lot of them will stick if they do it.
I'm laughing because all of us here probably have this shared experience. You said startup life, it's risky, it's flawed, it's not rational, and yet here we are gravitating. Yeah. We all somehow want that, right? You've talked about how you get benefit from trying these things out, you're learning about yourself. Let's also talk about it from a financial perspective as well. When we're talking about risk, it means going into a more traditional 9-to-5 established corporation, there might be less risk, but also what are some of the things that really staying true in that startup scene you can get to? I would love to talk about the financial potentials of that space, and from a kind of honest perspective, here are really the things that we need our startup scene to do because it benefits these local companies and it benefits our larger community as well.
Which one do you want me to start on?
Thank you.
Yeah. Which part do you want me to start on?
I don't know.
Okay. So I think there are definitely financial trade-offs. It's easier to do this when you're young and cheap, straight out of school. That being said, I think some of the savviest founders wait, and they build the business based on their real experiences. So when I was at Straight Shot and I was making investment decisions, I loved when someone's problem and solution came from a direct experience. And if you're fresh out of school, you don't have that. So that's another reason that I'm a big proponent that if you're interested in this scene, that you should understand there's more than one path to startups. You don't have to start something.
Yeah.
Just go join the company that has momentum. Join the company that just raised. You don't have to love their mission. You don't have to, just go get experience. Or frankly, go to First National and have a career. And if you still have that itch, you probably have some financial service experience that will give you some light bulbs. So I don't think there has to be one path. But I do think starting when you're cheap is easier. It's hard to make a leap later in life. But I think we should encourage as an ecosystem people to join when they have no money, when they've made money, and we should have enough roles that they can participate, whether that's a founder, an employee, an investor, something in between. So I think my non-answer is that it's okay whenever you get to the ecosystem. It's okay if you never fully dive in, but we all should understand what it is. We should all, experiment with it. And for anyone that's in it, we should support them.
Mm-hmm. I think it creates more of a nuanced, enriched understanding of the local business scene when we have those direct experiences. So I appreciate that shout out. I think it makes sense. All of us are, interested in building locally, and our city benefits from doing so. So talking about that honesty, I think, is really an important part of that piece. I would love to spend a little time talking about what it looked like from when you started with Buildertrend to where you are now, and diving into what it really means to be in strategy for the company. I think there are some good takeaways that we can all get from that. And then we will be shortly turning it over to questions.
Sounds good. So I referenced this earlier. Buildertrend has been amazing because it's been 2 tours of duty, 2 different companies, in terms of how it feels, how we made investments. When I started, we were 150 people-ish. I always say it was 150 employee. I have no idea. It was around there. It's just a nice round number. But 150 people, call it 15 million in revenue. We're neck and neck with a competitor. And the business was run in a very startup way. There were 2 brothers, Steve and Jeff Duggar and Dan Howden, that made all the top decisions. They were our board. No one was CEO. They were all equal in every sense. And when I joined, it still felt familiar. It felt like Mind Mixer, but bigger, more people. But it definitely had the startup feel. We were about to invest in a big go-to-market expansion. We went from 15 million to 70 million during that bootstrap phase, mostly by having a very aggressive outbound sales team. We hired fresh out of school. We trained them on the Buildertrend way. The joke is we signed up everybody in residential with a credit card, made it really easy to say yes, money back guarantees, a whole bunch of stupid things you do to reduce friction and get people in the door, and just bet on good people and a good enough product to keep them. And it worked in the sense that we went from neck and neck with our biggest competitor to 3 times bigger than them. So when the founders decided, yes, they do want to do a transaction, yes, they do want to take some chips off, but also see what the company's ceiling could be, we were in a position of strength. And when we talked to the 30 plus private equity firms, top firms that came to Omaha to talk to, vet the business in 2018, 19, none of them understood why our sales team was so big. None of them understood all of that, but it made sense to the founders. And they had a singular focus on achieving scale, being bigger than the closest competitor. And it was the reason why we were able to partner with Bain Capital and HGGC, 2 really good firms, and then buy that biggest competitor. And so it was a very Midwestern, hire a ton of salespeople, not a ton of engineers. There's some pros and cons in that, but the point really is that they did it their own way. It was 3 founders making investment decisions that they believed in. They had conviction, they had a plan, and we executed. And that allows us to get to the next phase. The last 5 years have been radically different. You bring in double Ivies, and they're all really good at making very database database investment decisions, all toward an ultimate transaction and getting the business to a certain valuation. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's their role in the market, but it does change the way that you grow, what you invest in. However, it also unlocks the best consultants, the best recruiters. Our CTO is from Santa Barbara. He founded a company that went public. Our CFO has done a whole bunch of impressive things. And so it turns you into a different style of company, but it also unlocks a different scale. And so I think the biggest takeaway is the corporate structure, the type of investors you have directly changes your ceiling, but also your opportunities to invest in what you can do as a company.
Does anyone have any questions now? Yeah.
What would you say is the biggest challenge you had to overcome your role in the startup? I built a trend, and how'd you overcome it?
My role?
Yeah.
I didn't answer your question about strategy. That's because nobody knows what it is anyways. My biggest initial role, honestly, was being the first outside leader. It was a really tight-knit leadership team, and they were all awesome. They all were welcoming, but I had to come in and do two things that were in conflict: exert and have an impact, prove why I was there, add something different, but also build trust. And I hadn't been on the journey with it. I hadn't been part of the team that went through the Great Recession and powered through almost closing 3 or 4 times. So it was more of an interpersonal challenge to start, honestly. Beyond that, it's the common things. You come into a new industry, a new business, you have to learn and be thoughtful. But originally it was that. I think the private equity phase, the hardest thing has been my role in strategy went from something very narrow to something really broad. And then now it's kind of come back to something a little more specific as we, bought our biggest competitor, launched new business units, hired outside leaders. And so I think the hardest thing there was almost internal as well, which is your impact goes really broad and big, and then it comes and narrows. And I think what is strategy? One, it's a team sport. No one person does it. But if you're in a strategy role, you have to solve the top problem at the time. Sometimes that's a really broad thing. Sometimes it's a tabula rasa, come up with a vision, and others it's hunt for 5 companies that have this really specific profile to see if there's a partnership. That's the kind of the biggest challenge in the sense that those two things are very different. And people are better at one or the other. Some feel better than the other, and that's been the biggest thing about it. Charlie?
Yeah. How did, those first days, like your day-to-day look, and how did it evolve into what your kind of day-to-day is now?
My day-to-day right away was whatever I defined it to be. The best thing about Dan is that he's a big delegator and super trusting. And so, like I said, it was go figure out these value-add services. So honestly, I went back to the advice I would give the startup founders in Straight Shot, and I said, okay, I got to talk to as many people as possible and whittle down the list. And so I did customer development. I talked to as many of our customers as I could. I took every inbound partner call. I probably wasted a whole bunch of people's time by asking stupid questions, but then through all those, my questions got smarter. My 12 things we could launch got down to 3 or 4 that, rose to the top. And then I launched one. And that was the whole first draft. I just talked to a ton of people, followed the advice I gave for 3 years to startup founders, and put a shitty first draft out there and went from there. And so it was, in a way that maybe didn't make sense on paper, very connected to what I did at Straight Shot and then what I did as a 7th employee. Now it's dramatically different. I mean, we have really high talented specialists, and my role primarily is about external acquisitions, external partnerships, and being one of the executives on the leadership team. And so it couldn't be more different, which has honestly been the coolest part about Buildertrend, is that the same company, same general mandate, but dramatically different day to day.
Let's talk about value-added services. What was the why?
Why do that? Why add it to the company?
Yeah, was it margins or was it here?
It was a few things. I think Dan always looked at successful startup companies and tech companies and tried to understand what they're doing. Have these value-add services, they brought in more revenue than their core platform. And he had an instinctual belief that we could do something like that. So the original mandate was an instinctual founder decision. The financial reasons relate to stickiness. So if someone's, not only getting their software from you, but also buying their insurance, they're not going to leave. And so it was both, but I would say the biggest driving force was Dan Houghton's instincts. And so, the decision to hire me, the decision to give me the mandate, and the decision to, back the things that I said the market could support all came from that. And that's another big difference. Sorry, real quick. You don't make decisions in that way when you're private equity backed. It's great, but not only prove it through talking to customers, but give me the model that not only will be successful, but also will have a big enough impact that it's worth our time. Very rational, very appropriate, very different. And so.
We say congratulations, first of all. Great to hear a story out of Nebraska like this. And it really, the follow through on that is, it is a company where technology was at its core, the human resource was at its core, the ability to manage change was fundamental, and you continue to grow through all of that. And I guess the elemental question is, if you were looking back and saying, one philosophical piece that held it all together through those many changes and changes of priority, was there a common theme there?
It's going to sound cliche, but it's the grit that is Midwestern. I think that's changing now as we've become a national employer. We have executives that are from other places, but what got the company through the Great Recession before I joined was Dan, Jeff, and Steve not taking a salary and just doing whatever. What got us through COVID was 4 or 5 of us on a daily call just trying to figure it out. And we were trying to sell the business at that point. We had an LOI, actually. We had a buyer in our office. And then CNBC flashes up, they all get calls, they all leave. It was, it would have been funnier if it weren't like the deal blowing up, but it was just straight out of a movie. And then, we all had to just put our head back down. We've had hard times since the private equity phase. And so I think Dan and the founders in particular just wouldn't give up. And maybe that's not Midwestern, that's just a founder being a founder. What I've learned in working for and with founders is that I'm not one of them. There's just an inherent irrationality that you have to have. I mean that with love, but you have to see an opportunity and run through any wall. And there's something inspiring about that. And so what got us through is that we have 3 true founders. And I've been the beneficiary of not only their efforts, but also Nick and Nathan's, the founders I worked with at Straight Shot. So, from a community perspective, from a human perspective, like these folks are a little off maybe. I say that once again with love, but they also take the risk that I wouldn't myself. And as a community, we should find them, we should celebrate them, we should go work for them, we should invest in them. And so that's what got us through. It's that classic, they were willing to do whatever it took.
Yeah. So as you grew, did you feel like the culture changed, but then how that applied like dramatically? Like, for example, if you're more horizontal, you have to grow more vertical in terms of, setting up formal structures, formal reporting systems, like things are maybe broken and chaotic and you have to formalize them, and did that create friction as well internally? And
Yes. Like a lot of startups, org design was always a distant, was always chasing strategy and instincts for a long time. When we did the Bain deal, we did a 5-year visioning process that I was fortunate to be part of. And that's when we started to think a little bit more about org design. Do we need business units? Like, what sort of talent do we need? And they can help you find the best talent in the nation. But there was this like tissue rejection of like heavy org design conversations, and some of it probably was overdone, but we probably overdid it. And so we went from not ever caring about it to trying to, as we craft new strategy, also change the organizational structure, and then some of those things just not going well. and then building it back. And so I am a firm believer that good strategy has to be married with good org design. But I also just admitted I'm not a founder, and I think good founders should force other people to build good structures around their belief, their idea. So I think it's okay if you're playing catch up. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but so yes, we have changed. We have built all sorts of processes, and our CFO is the most process-driven person I've ever been around, and he's doing a great job. And we need that now, at a company of our size. But I don't think you need it in certain phases, and I think you can overdo it early. And it's been fun to see when we did not enough of it, when we did too much of it. And then, I think we're in a pretty balanced state right now.
Could you double click a little bit on your time with Straight Shot? Just kind of explain a little bit what that was, and then maybe how analyzing those deals helps with the M&A process and stuff you're doing today.
Yeah.
I think founders don't understand about venture capital. Just to add on.
That's a whole different lecture. So Straight Shot, at that point, there were only two accelerators. It was InMotion in Lincoln and Straight Shot in Omaha. Same generic model that was pretty present everywhere at 2013 or whatever that was. 6, 7 companies, a set term sheet, 3 months, and then trying to raise more money through a demo day and connections. So I don't say generic like to be disrespectful, it's like that was the model that spread across the nation, and there was some like Nebraska needs it. Mark Haysbrook helped start one here. InMotion, Brian Ardinger started one Lincoln. And so it was part venture capital, like a way to allow people to dip their toes in from an investment perspective, part community development. From a business model perspective, I had to raise both my venture funds from people who wanted at least some sort of return, but I also had to raise my salary and the entire budget. And those typically came from like more community economic development sort of minds. And so there's a bit of a tension there, but it was great because I do think it played a role similar to what you all do with this event does, which is if you're curious, it gave people a way to dip their toes in. And so we did a lot of events, worked with the companies. And so it was kind of, there's this public, like, come figure it out, come, get exposed to startups. And then behind the scenes, it was working with teams of 1 to 3 founders, some of whom were technical, some of whom were non-technical and needed to find a developer. I personally loved the work with the companies more. It just felt more like real work, even though I respected the rest of it. How it relates to M&A and the deals that we've done at Buildertrend, I think it trained me really well. So we bought our biggest competitor, but then we've done a couple of small tuck-in acquisitions. 2 of those were founder-led companies, like call it 5 million in revenue. And so the profile of those founders was exactly the same as the one that I helped, just a little further along. And so it allowed me to understand abnormal problems versus normal problems in their business, how to relate to them, and how to connect their vision, which may be imperfect, which was also imperfect, but a little further along. So it was a great training ground. And final point, structuring deals and transactions sounds all sexy, but at the end of the day, it's a contract. It's just a way to memorialize an agreement. And that often comes down to just the psychology of what both sides wants. Yes, a number, but ultimately it's, do we want to work together? Do we share the same vision? And that was exactly the same when I was trying to convince somebody with no revenue to get into Straight Shot, or somebody with X amount of revenue to come join Buildertrend. So it was an awesome training ground for me, and it's been fun to see the connections between the two. I don't even know how to start with your question. I'm joking. What? Say it again.
Well, because I was originally going to ask you what Straight Shot touched about venture capital.
Yeah.
Charlie kind of beat me to it. But the second part of that was kind of your perspective. You said a number of times that you're not a founder, but I think you probably have some founder attributes and you're willing to admit. But what do you think founders don't understand about venture capital?
that it's better to bootstrap if you can. That's honestly one of my takeaways from Buildertrend.
For as long as you can.
You should bootstrap as long as you can, if you can. It's not possible for some business models. You can gain a lot of speed from raising, but when you own the company, you own investment decisions. You own your destiny. If you make a mistake, it only hurts you. You don't have a board or a boss, and you have more control. And so, I think people get into it sometimes because it is the path that you read about. It's a nice resume thing to check. But I think the best advice is talk to a lot of people that have taken capital of various kinds and make a very intentional decision about if your business needs it right then. Because it's always better to wait. It's always better to fund your business through revenue. And ultimately, even if you take money, you're going to have to get to that point. You're going to have to fund the venture through real revenue at some point. So the earlier you make those hard decisions and you focus on that, the better. That's my best advice is don't fall in love with it. Don't think you have to do it. And if you do it, make sure you're intentional about the type of investor, how much you need to raise, and what you're going to use it for.
Can you answer that same question, but in regards to M&A?
Yeah, I think maybe I'm just jaded. I don't know. I don't think that buying companies should be your first place you look. I think M&A should come from strategy. You should have conviction that our business should get into this market or offer this product. And then you should explore, should we build it? Should we partner? Should we buy? I think that simply buying revenue or skipping to an acquisition can feel like an easy button, but integrations are hard. Cultures are always different. And most people that start companies don't want to work for someone else. And so even if it makes perfect sense on paper in a spreadsheet, the fire that made that person start the company on the side typically doesn't stay when they come join a bigger company. And so I actually think it's harder, even though it's easier. It feels like an easy button. So I have a strong preference toward bootstrapping if you can, and organic growth if you can.
Okay, what is the biggest challenge you've ever faced, and what pieces of your mindset helps you to defeat it and move forward?
Repeat the questions because the camera won't hear what he says.
Yeah. Biggest challenge I faced and...
Biggest one, and which parts of your mindset helps you to face it and move forward?
And then what part of my mindset helps me face it? It's a good question. I think from a business perspective, I'll answer it two ways. I think the first one was the psychological barrier of joining a company that is risky. We talked a little bit about that. If my mixer didn't have a connection to government and policy, there's absolutely no way I would have gotten into tech. I was too calculating. I was too small town, there's a path and you stick to it. I wouldn't have done it. And so I feel fortunate. So that one I think was luck. But I think that was a big barrier to get over. From an actual business perspective, I think honestly, COVID and Buildertrend was the most extreme. The whole world stopped, as we all know. And we were in the middle of a transaction, and we had it's like when you wrap your head around a future version of yourself, the company, and then it just goes away. And it rattled all of us. What got us through it was just hop on a call every single day. And some of the calls were total waste of time from a business perspective. Others were super transactional. So I think what we had at that point were years of operating together, and we banded together. So I think the culture that was really tight-knit, that was hard to join when I was the outside leader, was the part that got us through that. So that was kind of our joint attribute, not mine individually, but that was the hardest business challenge. And it was, just, we're all in this together. We're going to take it literally one meeting at a time, and figure it out. Yeah, there was kind of a Pepsi-Coke dynamic in the market. The products were functionally the same. We were bigger because of the go-to-market investment. But if you did a blind demo of the two, you probably wouldn't have been able to tell that much difference. And it was just part of the thesis that the private equity firms and the founders had. So we actually talked to all of the PE firms and said, here's the deal that we think makes sense. If it's one of the things you put in your deck is potential acquisitions. And that was one that we all felt conviction around. Some of the PE firms like, no. Bain really bought into it. And it was part talent consolidation. I think we all did the same thing. There's great people on both sides. The other part was just the PE playbook of you have a bigger lead if you don't have a biggest competitor. And that served us really well for a long time. Now it's hyper competitive. There are more competitors now than we've ever had. And we're probably 10x our biggest competitor. But AI and other things mean that 10x maybe don't matter as much. But at that point, it was a talent consolidation, create a lead that you can exploit. And that's just kind of straight out the playbook. So the investment I talked about was actually V2. So V1 was Dan, our founder. He's a sales-minded person. He had a sales background. And then he hired one of his friends who didn't join right away. He joined maybe a year before I did. And that friend is very direct and had a sales background. And he just built a big machine at Thrasher, Basement Solutions. And he basically told Dan, like, you're doing it wrong, I should do it. And so he was in kind of a partnerships role. It wasn't exactly what I joined to do, but he moved to revenue, which created the ability for me to come over. And he architected the system. The beauty was, Claudia and I have talked a lot about this, is that it was very simple. It's if we get X number of demos, we get Y sales, which is Z revenue. And he didn't care about unit economics, he didn't care about like efficiency of it. It's just, I don't care how many calls we have to make. We need X demos because that leads to Y, or sorry, X. The XYZ led to a certain amount of revenue, and basically that revenue number came from the founders, and they said, "Here's the revenue we want to hit." And Josh said, "Okay, I need 200 salespeople making this number of calls, and we'll just do it because it'll get us there." So like a very non-traditional tech way to grow, but it worked. Now, it created more churn. It signed up a whole bunch of folks that probably shouldn't have been signed up, but ultimately, the founders didn't really care about being perfect. They just wanted to get to a certain revenue goal because they made the decisions. And Josh since has changed it dramatically to be more enterprise. So he really has a genius around change management at scale. And so he was the architect of version 2, 3, and whatever comes. The company has been profitable every year since 2006, except for 1 year post private equity where we got a little aggressive, and we've been profitable every year since. So they were profitable. That was the other thing is they not only bootstrapped it, they ran it with expectations that they were not going to lose money and that they were going to pay themselves dividends, and also something you don't really see. And so, we were able to grow to 250 salespeople making 20,000 calls a day and still make money.
I was going to ask a lot about the sales because we talk a lot about it. But so when Bain came in, did they want to change that massive structure?
Yes.
Besides that, what was the biggest change besides the focus on numbers and the 5-year plan?
Yes. Bain and about every other private equity firm we talked to hated it. They said you have too many salespeople, it's not efficient. And we were like, but it worked. And so that was, we did this like speed dating with 30 of them, and we thought like one of them would just get so excited that we wouldn't have to do a formal process. And the biggest reason was they couldn't just wrap their head around the spend and the inefficiencies. And they were right, but they were also wrong in the sense that we were profitable, we were the market leader, and we didn't have to do a private equity deal to survive. And so it was an interesting, like, two things can be true, perception is reality sort of thing. But they didn't like that, and they didn't like that we didn't have an ICP. Like everybody in residential with a credit card was kind of a joke, but also kind of true. And so Bain in particular deserves a ton of credit because they bet that they could change that over time. And they looked at the metrics, and after like 1 year of being at Buildertrend, our retention rates were world class, best in class. So they basically said, through time or this model stalling out, we will eventually get them to do an ICP, change the way they sell, and that will make the retention profile of the entire business what it is for post 1 year. All that first year stuff is noise because of the way they sell. And that's proved to be true. It hasn't been easy, may have taken too long for us to get to that point, but that's where they deserve a ton of credit. And that's where their expertise is really shown.
You mentioned AI earlier, how it might help competitors challenge you. Do you have a particular AI strategy? I mean, I noticed you hired Charlie Bosco, who's probably the best AI guy in the area.
Charlie's the best.
Yeah, he is. But do you have a particular strategy staying up at night thinking, what am I going to do as a CEO about AI, or is it more, well, I expect this to get better?
Yeah. Our CTO and his VP of product are spending a lot of time on this. His name is John Walker. He's the founder of Appfolio, and he's a CTO and co-founder, and helped take it public. And for some reason, he wants to, be part of a band again. I would not be doing that if I were him. I'd be, taking it easy, but God bless him. Yeah, like Manny, exactly. We are the incumbent, and so incumbents have some advantages when it comes to AI. We have some disadvantages. We have a lot of infrastructure, but we also have a ton of rich data no one else has. And so we're trying to be really thoughtful about how to leverage our strengths without trying to beat a native AI app at their game. And really what that translates into is starting with low-hanging fruit opportunities to streamline our general contractors' workflows. So a good example is there's something called owner updates. And so if you're building a home and the contractor is using Buildertrend, they used to have to type all that in or like pick and choose. Right now it's all automated and they just have to say, yes, this is a good update. So it's a very small, maybe not super sexy application, but it saves a lot of time for our GCs. It delights homeowners in a way that maybe wouldn't have occurred if it required work from the GC. And so they're starting there, and there's a lot of stuff that Charlie and others are dreaming up behind the scenes. And so we're trying to incrementally leverage new technology, new ways of thinking without running away from some of our advantages. I'm not sure. There was a company called Katera, like 4 or 5 years ago, that raised a ton of money, and they were doing like modular robotics driven construction. And it failed. I don't think it's because they were pursuing that strategy. I think it's because of other challenges. One thing that insulates Buildertrend a bit from modular homes or fully automating the construction process is the type of homes that our builders construct are typically higher end, more custom homes or bigger, higher end remodels. And the scope is not something that you just pull off the shelf. It is from scratch. And so it just makes for some complexities around the technical side and the operational side of automating. So I think we have a little bit more of a barrier because of the nature of the work that our GCs do. But I think it's another area that will change.
This is amazing. Thank you so much. Appreciate all the questions. I want to be intentional about our time, but this was a great conversation. As a final way to kind of conclude, I would love for you to think about, if you take a step back and give a really high-level overview from your experiences, from consulting with other businesses, nonprofits. Is there something that like comes through for you that you're like, I wish more people would think about this, or I recommend you do this, to leave us with that as kind of some parting words?
I think I've said a few of them. I think when I'm on boards or when I'm talking to smaller companies that are asking for advice, I often say things like, revisions are better than first drafts, fall in love with revisions, talk to customers. Like, I don't think startups are hard from an academic perspective. I think they're hard because there's too much work. There's scary answers to some of the questions that people can avoid. And so I think the best advice I have is more around learn the hard answers quick. And how do you do that? By getting something to react to, by asking objective questions and not having confirmation bias. So it's almost more psychological than anything. It's a really hard space to be in. It's even harder if you're not asking hard questions and being honest about what you're hearing.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you all. Wonderful to have you.